The National Desk, America's News Now.
Palestinians flee their homes as Israeli forces enter Gaza to root out Hamas.
Israel is conducting operations in Gaza because Hamas carried out terrorist attacks that killed in the most horrific ways.
While the House remains speakerless, a new nominee emerges as Republicans look for a leader to unite a divided party.
The fact that Kevin got thrown out, Steve wasn't able to come to the floor, just that being the case, there's going to be people that are upset.
Nearly 80 years in the making, Lexi Thompson tees it off in Arizona with a chance to play alongside the men this weekend. How she fared in round 2 of the Shriners Children's Open. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Amira David. As we come on the air tonight, indications that Israeli ground operations inside Gaza are underway. Nearly a week after a surprise Hamas attack, initial raids by the Israeli Defense Forces have begun as the country attempts to root out Hamas targets. The IDF has said these raids are not a full ground offensive yet. Israel has given Gazan citizens in the north evacuation orders to leave the area and head south in an effort to reduce civilian casualties as they continue the airstrikes in the territory. White House officials have said Israel's evacuation order for Gaza is practically impossible, but stopped short of criticizing the decision.
We understand what they're trying to do. They're trying to move civilians out of harm's way and giving them fair warning. Now, it's a tall order. It's 1 million people, and it's a very urban, dense environment. It's already a combat zone. So I don't think anybody's underestimating the challenge here of affecting that evacuation.
Palestinians have begun a mass exodus, this as the humanitarian crisis in Gaza worsens. Airstrikes have already left 2.2 million Gazans without power and running water. Hospitals, meantime, are overwhelmed with wounded patients, and it's not clear when humanitarian aid will be allowed in. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Bahrain, where he recently met with the Prime Minister, Crown Prince Salman bin Hamad Al Khalifa. Blinken has been touring the Middle East in an effort to keep fighting in the region from escalating. Earlier this afternoon, Blinken met with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and Jordan's King Abdullah in Jordan, while also visiting Qatar this afternoon. Blinken spoke there of keeping the war contained.
The United States and Qatar share the goal of preventing this conflict from spreading. We discussed in detail our efforts to prevent any actor, state or non-state, from creating a new front in this conflict.
In Lebanon, a Hezbollah official said during a protest today that the group will, quote, contribute to the confrontation when they are fully ready, despite calls from Arab nations to stay out of the war. Meanwhile, defense experts are calling for the U.S. to cut off all funding to Iran to keep things from turning into a bigger, widespread Middle East war. And our Janae Bowens explains.
We have to stop fueling the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism.
Director of the Center for National Defense at the Heritage Foundation and one of the principals behind the Abraham Accords, Robert Greenway says the U.S. strategy for the Israel-Hamas war must include cutting off funding to Iran.
Since January 2021, when the administration decided to reverse course and pursue a policy, frankly, of appeasement with the Islamic Republic, they've benefited to the extent of some $80 billion.
Following reports that Iran supported the deadly Hamas attacks in Israel, the United States and Qatar will not allow Iran to access the $6 billion originally promised as part of a deal to free 5 Americans detained in Iran.
Not a dime has been accessed, and we are watching it very, very closely.
Greenway says the U.S. must also work to contain the war to Israel and Gaza.
A regional escalation could include Hezbollah in Lebanon, different militant groups and terrorist organizations in the West Bank and in Jerusalem, and then Iranian surrogates and proxies from Syria, Iraq, and Yemen.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the U.S. is working with Qatar to ensure the conflict doesn't turn into a widespread war in the Middle East.
We discussed in detail our efforts to prevent any actor, state or non-state, from creating a new front in this conflict.
The potential global impact of this war and the war in Ukraine led JP Morgan Chase's CEO and chairman, Jamie Dimon, to give a stark warning in the company's latest report, saying in part, this may be the most dangerous time the world has seen in decades.
Mira, experts warn this war could lead to negative effects on the world's energy and food markets, global trade, and geopolitical relationships.
Are there concerns right now that there could be threats of Hamas here in the United States?
Well, the White House says there is not a threat to the U.S. at this time. However, Greenway, who you just heard from in the piece, says terrorists coming in from the southern border is a concern, especially with more than 150 people on the terrorist watch list being apprehended this year alone, which is an all-time high. Amira.
All right, Janae, thank you, as always, in D.C. for us. All terminals at the Philadelphia International Airport reopened this morning following a shooting late last night in an adjacent parking garage. Two unnamed police officers, were shot. One had passed away while the other is now in stable condition. The two policemen had tried to stop a break-in of a car in the garage when shots rang out. The multiple suspects are still on the loose with no one in custody. There's a $30,000 reward offered by police for information that can lead to an arrest, but more than 20 other organizations also gave donations, bringing the total reward to $148,000. And to an update on that Morgan State University shooting, a 17-year-old boy has been arrested in connection with the rampage that injured 5 young people, 4 of which were students. Because that suspect is a minor, they will not release his name nor his photo, but a second suspect, he remains on the run, and police did release his 18-year-old Javon Williams. Police consider him to be armed and dangerous and ask anyone who comes into contact with him to call 911 immediately. The arrest follows a recent town hall in which the president of the university announced new plans for security enhancements, citing a goal to enclose 90% of the campus to eliminate access by bad actors or non-students. Healthcare worker unions now have a tentative deal with Kaiser Permanente after the biggest healthcare strike in U.S. history last week, lasting 3 days. The unions had threatened a longer strike if there was no agreement by the end of this month. The details of the tentative deal have not been made public. Now it's up to rank and file union members to vote on it. Meanwhile, the big 3 auto workers have been on strike for almost a month now. UAW President Shawn Fain gave an update today on where things stand.
Today, we're not announcing expansion of our strike, but we are prepared at any time to call on more locals to stand up and walk out.
Fain said the union is now in a new phase and will stop waiting until Friday to announce strike expansions. He added that Ford recently offered the same deal the union had turned down 2 weeks ago. Fain said there was no good news yet from GM and Stellantis, but talks, he said, continue. Well, part of the disconnect between the union and auto companies is how to deal with electric vehicles, which require fewer workers and cost less to make. Production shifts to EVs have led to record sales in the United States. According to a report from Cox Automotive, EV sales in the U.S. increased 49% in the third quarter of 2023 when compared to the last year at the same time. But the push towards electric vehicles is still costing automakers billions of dollars. The National Desk's Angela Brown breaks down the numbers.
Rivian Automotive is known for aspiring to become the Tesla of trucks. It took Tesla years to turn a profit, and now electric truck maker Rivian reportedly lost $33,000 per vehicle.
When you're selling a vehicle for $80,000, that's half the story. If you don't sell many of them, then you can't be profitable.
And it's not just Rivian. Ford expects to lose $4.5 billion on its EV business this year. Cedarville economics professor Dr. Jeff Heyman.
Americans and globally, this is true globally, do not want EVs as much as are being pushed. That's one of the reasons why we saw, for instance, Tesla had to cut prices on their EVs.
EV sales in the U.S. are rising, jumping to more than 300,000 in the third quarter, a record. GM CEO Mary Barra sees an all-electric future.
We're the only full-line manufacturer to commit that our light-duty vehicles in the United States will be all EV by 2035.
But Dr. Tim Nash, who runs the McNair Center at Northwood University, a leading automotive management program, is worried about the future of American jobs.
Roughly, it takes 60% of the workers to build an electric vehicle than to build an internal combustion engine vehicle. So you're going to see a dramatic decline in the number of people working in the auto factories of the future.
Nash is worried about American jobs because the auto industry has a lot of legs. Auto workers, car dealerships, parts suppliers. Overall, over 4 million jobs are directly tied to the auto industry. In Washington, D.C., I'm Angela Brown.
Well, coming up, the latest in lawmakers' efforts to fill the House Speaker position, plus a new poll revealing how Americans view Republican leaders' handling of their jobs. Then why Ford is recalling hundreds of thousands of vehicles in the U.S. and which models are impacted. Plus, how a doctor is using his love of cycling to help scientists find new cancer treatments and work towards a cure. We'll be right back. House Republicans remain divided tonight despite new efforts today to rally around one GOP nominee for House Speaker. Just hours ago, GOP members nominated Rep. Jim Jordan for Speaker in an internal closed-door vote over Rep. Austin Scott of Georgia, who had entered the race last minute. Jordan, he is still 55 votes short of the votes needed to move forward in full support. The question is whether he can rally a total 217 votes to secure the gavel. All of it comes after Rep. Steve Scalise withdrew from the race, unable to secure the votes himself. The back and forth creating some frustration from Republicans who want to get back to work.
We've allowed emotion to get in the way of logic and in the way of the necessity to actually govern. I did not come here to be emotional. I came here to govern.
Congress has been without a speaker since last Tuesday, and House business can't continue without one in place. As it turns out, Americans are also getting frustrated with that reality. According to a new CNN poll, nearly 3/4 of voters disapprove of the way GOP leaders are handling their jobs. That's up from 67% in January. 52% have a negative impression of the party overall, up from 45% in December. And among Republican voters, just 44% approve of the leadership, which is down sharply from 58% in January. The National Desk's Chris Daniels explains how the absence of a speaker is actually impacting the country in much larger ways.
Another day without a resolution means another day with uncertainty.
We're paralyzed right now.
That's according to Washington Congresswoman and Democrat Susan DelBene.
Well, I think Democrats have been willing to work in a bipartisan fashion because that's the only way anything gets done.
DelBene's comments come among Republican infighting and as Congress faces pressure on 3 spending fronts: on Ukraine, the southern border, and Israel.
Can the U.S. continue to fund Ukraine in that battle and Israel in this battle?
Well, we definitely need stability in the Middle East, and Israel is a democracy that's existed there for a very long time, and we want to see it continue.
Washington Senator Maria Cantwell.
We have a very important role right now because we're missing some key people to be part of the discussion. We need an ambassador to Israel. We need an ambassador to Egypt. We need an ambassador in Lebanon so that the U.S. can be part of the discussion. Congress has to move forward. It has to move forward on a budget and budget negotiations, has to move forward on helping Israel, has to have a partner in the Senate.
Adds Del Benny.
We need to not only make sure that we bring legislation to the floor to support Israel and Ukraine and, this package that may come together. We'll need a speaker to move that forward. We also need to be working very quickly to make sure the government's funded for the rest of the fiscal year.
That deadline is November 17th, which gets closer with each passing day and congressional chaos continuing.
Well, clean energy projects in 7 states have been selected to jumpstart hydrogen fuel production. President Biden made the announcement today in Philadelphia.
I'm here to announce one of the largest advanced manufacturing investments in the history of this nation. $7 billion in federal investments. It's going to attract $40 billion in private investment in clean hydrogen and power of the economy.
He said the program will help combat climate change and create jobs through hydrogen hubs with the goal of replacing fossil fuels with hydrogen. The gap between the taxes Americans owe the government and what they actually pay is growing. That's according to a new IRS report. It found the tax gap surged to about $688 billion for the tax year of 2021, a major jump from the estimates seen for tax years 2014 through 2016. The IRS commissioner says the data underscores the importance of increasing compliance efforts. Ford is recalling more than 238,000 Explorers because of an elevated crash risk. A rear axle bolt can break, which could lead to a drive power loss or cause the SUVs to roll away while in park mode. The government was already looking into the problem after several complaints that pertain to 2020 and 2022 Explorers. Dealers will make necessary replacements. LPGA golfer Lexi Thompson finished her day at even par, tied with 17 others. It is expected the cut will be -2. She was trying to do something a woman hasn't done in 78 years, make the cut in a men's PGA tournament. The last woman to do it was Babe Dietrichson Zacharias in 1945. And Rudolph Isley, meantime, founding member of the R&B soul group, the Isley Brothers, he has passed away. He and his brothers made music for more than 6 decades, delivering hits like Who's That Lady and Shout. The band was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame and the Songwriters Hall of Fame. Rudolph Isley was 84 years old. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you. We are taking the pulse of America.
Texas senators once again moving forward on allocating state money for private schooling. It's not the first time, and it may not be the last time, depending on where things go from here. Republicans argue the difference this time around is while they're working to fund private schools, they are also working to pour billions of dollars into public schools.
We will continue to support public education with increased funding as we have every biennium but the subprime crash.
But is this go-around really all that different?
It's not as if one-time pay increases for teachers and, small increases in this per student allotment have been on the table before. And I think we're, not enough to move the needle on vouchers, frankly.
That's what critics of the initiative, Republican and Democrat alike, are holding out for.
Ambulance services remains a critical need in all communities. After years of first responders having to wonder if they will be paid for their services, lawmakers are now calling out insurance companies to deliver them their rightful reimbursements.
A250A seeks to help our ambulance and EMS providers by requiring that insurance companies directly pay providers for services rendered.
Assemblyman Bill Magnarelli says EMS providers are owed millions from patients who end up unknowingly keeping the health insurance checks that are often buried in a pile of paperwork sent from insurance companies. But it should also not be left to patients to pay for out-of-network emergency medical services.
In Kentucky, rural access to medical care has often been a challenge. Now, Pikeville Medical Center is trying to change that. They've received 2 federal grants to pay for EMT training for first responders and locals. 36 people were in the first class.
Anything from collecting vitals to bleeding control to how to wrap them for warmth if it's hypothermic.
The medical center hopes to teach more classes next year using the rest of the money. And coming up, a doctor is using his passion for cycling to help fund groundbreaking cancer research. How much his annual events have raised so far. Every dollar donated to cancer research can make a huge difference in the hopes of finding treatments or even a cure. One doctor has combined his love of cycling with his drive for research to benefit new studies at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island. Medical reporter Barbara Morse takes us to Tour de Rhode.
First year, we had about 90 riders and we raised $18,000.
Dr. Thomas O'Lilla, who organized the first Tour de Rhode in 2019, says this year the road and gravel cycling event featured more than 400 riders and raised $160,000. Every dime for cancer research. His specialty, lymphoma. That's a cancer of the lymphatic system.
It's one of the more common malignancies.
And it's becoming more treatable and curable.
We've moved beyond chemotherapy as being the backbone of how we treat these.
And that's because of research, much of it done out of the Brown University Oncology Research Group. This annual bicycle ride playing a big role, raising nearly $500,000 in 5 years to develop clinical trials, like one for a hard-to-treat lymphoma.
And that's a study that uses a new type of immune therapy that's now approved in subsequent lines of lymphoma that have relapsed after other treatments.
What's even more impressive is the level of support for this annual bike ride. It's all volunteer run. Many of those taking part are patients or families of patients who've since passed, one of them leaving some of his cancer cells to further research.
That's how we're advancing the field. We're figuring out how cancer hides from our therapies and going after that.
An interesting tidbit about Dr. O'Lilla, he rides his bicycle to work most days, rain or shine. I'm medical reporter Barbara Morse.
Barbara, thank you. Well, more than 1,000 suspects have been charged in the January 6th riots at the U.S. Capitol, but there are outstanding questions about the role undercover agents and informants played on that day. Full Measure with Cheryl Atkinson takes a look at key video that has investigators asking how some of the crowds were allowed to pass police lines.
Coming up this week on Full Measure, our year-long investigation into the January 6th Capitol riots. We've reviewed key video moments with numerous law enforcement experts. They're flagging unusual behavior on the part of some protesters and police, asking why some instigators were let behind police lines and even allowed to lead the crowd to the deadly confrontation where a Capitol Police lieutenant shot and killed unarmed protester Ashley Babbitt.
There's a gun! There's a gun!
What role did undercover agents and informants play in that day's chaos? Also, an update on our story about pharmacies that refuse to fill legal prescriptions for ivermectin to treat COVID. A court has smacked down FDA's overreach in warding people away from the medicine. That's this week on Full Measure.
And a new episode of Full Measure with Cheryl Atkinson airs this Sunday. Check your local listings for times. Also, don't miss the Full Measure After Hours podcast, available wherever you download your favorite podcasts. And coming up, a rocket is now on its way to its destination for a first-of-its-kind mission in space. What scientists believe it could reveal about planet Earth.
Three, two, one, engine ignition. And liftoff.
And there it goes. You're looking at a NASA spacecraft launch on a first-of-its-kind mission. SpaceX's Falcon Heavy rocket lifting off this morning, headed on a 6-year journey to study the rare metal-covered Psyche asteroid. Most asteroids tend to be rocky or icy, so this is going to be the first exploration of the metal world. And scientists believe it may be able to tell us how the Earth's core came to be. Kind of a big deal. And a Ring of Fire solar eclipse will make an appearance tomorrow for the first time in 2 years. The moon, sun, and Earth, they're all going to line up, but the moon will appear smaller than the sun, letting a ring of light shine through. It will be only visible in some states, but everyone in the contiguous U.S. will be able to see at least a partial eclipse. Just make sure you use those certified solar eclipse glasses to avoid any injury.